and I'm very much looking forward to listen to you both, because I was telling Shovita now, Ayushman, that my area of research is very close to her and to your area of research. It's just that I'm looking into a different part of the world, which is Mexico and the Mexican border, but very close, very, a lot of links among our research. It's a very topical research, what you're doing. And I'm sure students and others will find it very, very interesting. So before I introduce Shovita and Ayushman, just a couple of things. First, I copied and pasted the link to the center in the chat for you. Those of you who are not familiar with everything we do in the center, just go into the website, have a look to that, and let us know if you would like to join us to be part of the center, to participate. Just write an email to Louise or myself and let us know about your research. That's the first thing. We've got lots of activities coming, and actually we've got a hectic month coming up. Have a look to that, and then we can talk about it at the end of this presentation. How we normally do in these presentations is that I let Shovita talk for half an hour, and then straight away will come Ayushman, and then we'll open the floor for discussion and questions to our presenters, which I will chair. So if you've got questions, just make a note of it. You can connect your micro, or you can write those questions into the chat, and then we will address and we'll start conversation. So I will now introduce Shovita very briefly. Shovita just joined us, joined London Metropolitan. When was that, Shovita, that you joined us?
In September last year.
In September. I was going to ask you after the pandemic. Yes. So it was in September. She's senior lecturer in criminology. And so she's doing lots of research on women, migrant women in Nepal, who are working in the they say informal industry, or the business of sex, or whatever, market of sex, or etc. So very much looking forward to listen to her. She has conducted in the past lots of interviews, and yeah. And then Ayushman, you will talk about human trafficking, very much connected to that area, to that region too. And so, as I said, I'm just leaving them talk. These are fascinating topics, so I will now disappear for an hour, and then we'll come back for more. Thank you. And Shovita.
Thanks, Maria.
The floor is yours.
Just try to share my slide. Let me know if it's
There you go. Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Maria, for the introduction. It's lovely to see you finally. Although we work together, we never met each other, I think, to COVID and everything. And thanks, Ayushman, for being so spontaneous and agreeing to my invitation as well. It's great to just talk about Nepal and some of the challenges we face as researchers as well. But today, as Maria said, I'm going to talk about more than anti-trafficking. I'm looking into. Can you speak up? Oh, okay. Thanks, Wendy. Okay. So can you hear me well? Let me know. I know I can be a bit soft, but I need to go maybe closer to the mic. Yeah. So today's presentation will be on looking into women at the margins. By margins, I'm going to look into those women who have migrated to the city, to Kathmandu from rural areas, and sort of taken up various employment opportunity, whatever they can get hold of. At that time and that space, and as per their needs. So we'll be looking broadly into their lived experience, working predominantly in the entertainment sector. So a bit of context. So basically, studies say the UN has stated that more than 60% of world's workers are engaged in informal sector. The International Labour Organization claimed that 4 in 5 workers in developing countries are in vulnerable employment, which means they are subject to different forms of precarity and abuse. High proportion of females in Nepal are engaged in informal sector, and they often are subject to gender bias, both in their pay and in conditions. And over the past decade, the entertainment sector which are the largest form of informal sector in Nepal. It employs over hundreds of female workers in the sector. It includes like working in dance bars, guest houses, massage parlors, dohori. This is a very traditional folk song type of establishment, and more recently something called khajagar, which I keep referring throughout the presentation as tea shops and restaurants, such as cabin restaurants. So they're like tiny spaces where they serve food and drinks. So all of these are located in urban and semi-urban areas of Nepal. And like I said, the more and more women have been employed in this sector. However, the problem with entertainment sector is that there are overlap with certain trafficking phenomena. There are studies that argue that women or children who work in the sector, in these various entertainment sector, are also victims of trafficking. So the National Human Rights Commission of Nepal 2019 report that approximately 1.5 million Nepalese are at risk of being trafficking. Around 35,000 people are trafficked in 2018 and 19 to work in different sectors, and of which 20% of them are women and children in the entertainment sector. So because of this idea, or if this notion around that women and children engaged in entertainment sector can also be victim of trafficking, there are a number of initiations, responses to tackle the problem. A number of government and NGO international have extended their engagement in these sectors, implementing a range of anti-trafficking programs, basically focusing on abolition strategies. By abolition strategies is because of this idea of that trafficking and prostitution overlaps, although there's discussions that not all women who are involved in the sex industry or entertainment sectors are victims of trafficking. But in the context of Nepal, it's often an overlapping category. At least people would say so. So these organizations respond in numerous ways through various abolition strategies, like often limiting and controlling measures such as rescue, rehabilitation, and reintegration model. So what I argue in my research, that the depiction of these narratives, these dominant anti-trafficking narratives, are in these sectors often sensationalized, lacking in nuances, and voices and experiences of these women who actually work in these sectors are often marginalized and often unheard of. So part of my research stemmed from this idea, from this passion towards understanding their experiences, their lived experiences, who work in this sector as well. So, giving you a bit of background in again with the anti-trafficking, where it comes from, like I said, because it's often overlapped with the entertainment sector. Nepal has ratified various international conventions to protect the rights of children and women in Nepal. So, for example, CEDAW, the Child Rights Convention when it comes to children's rights. We've not ratified the Palmer Protocol, we're in the process of ratification, and two regional conventions, the South Asian Regional Conventions and South Asian Welfare Conventions. All of this fall within the broader umbrella of the anti-trafficking interventions in Nepal. And basically, these interventions are these international conventions have shaped our national laws and policies around anti-trafficking. According to the US DIP report, Nepal is in tier 2 category. Basically, it means that we are still at high risk. There's more work to be done in terms of protecting the vulnerable group victims of trafficking. Yeah, so that's the international context. Looking into the national context, the anti-trafficking policy, then we have national legislations and policy development, the Human Trafficking Act and Transportation Control Act, the National Plan of Action are some of the major policies around anti-trafficking interventions. The main focus, again, with anti-trafficking, like with any other countries, international and even in developing and developed countries, the main focus is on the 3 R's, which is rescue, rehabilitation, and reintegration. And that has been a focus since the late 1990s in Nepal, since the narrative around cross-border trafficking. Prevention often includes border surveillance, awareness raising, policies, introducing policies and so forth. Protections means victim support, assisting victims, predominantly focusing on human rights approach. And prosecution, basically in investigating perpetrators, traffickers, and more international cooperation. So it's sort of the National Anti-Trafficking Intervention focuses on these domains, the 3 Ps and the 3 Rs, 3R domain. There's lots been said already as to how the anti-trafficking narrative is problematic when it comes to protecting rights of certain group of people, for example, sex workers or migrant workers, because of this conflation between sex work and trafficking. So in terms of regulating the entertainment sector, Nepal have separate policies as well. They have directives and to control, to regulate these entertainment businesses. The first directive is the directive to control sexual exploitation among female workers in dance bars, restaurants and businesses, and in nighttime economy. But then the problem is that these directives there is no much evidence suggesting that these directives are working. There are similar devices been introduced because there is lack of sort of enforcement of these directives or these regulations. What means is that NGOs and INGOs are sort of following the same strategies which are applied in cross-border traffic interventions, such as rescue, rehabilitation, and raid in these circumstances, aiming again to prevent women and children from participating in the entertainment sector. So in the absence of having an effective framework, the specific needs of, that's something I argue in my paper, in my research, the women in entertainment sector, particularly migrant women in entertainment sector, the responses offered by these agencies have remained rather ambiguous. So again, a bit of context here, because like I said, I am in my research, I interview migrant women who've sort of migrated from rural areas to urban areas. But rural-urban migration is not a new phenomena in Nepal. It has had its consequences because of various reasons. Early in the 1990s, there was women and children were moved to urban cities for work. In Nepal, historically, structural factors such as poverty, limited access to education, skilled jobs have triggered young people and women's mobility to urban cities. In the 1990s, the growth of export-oriented carpet industry had an impact in promoting mobility in the labor market. So the boom of the carpet industry in 1990 meant that there were need for cheaper labor, and women and children were filling those spaces. However, the carpet industry drew several criticisms from media, national organizations, international organizations for maintaining poor working conditions and exploiting child labor. Such critics forced government to put scrutiny on the carpet industries, and the emphasis was thus placed on removing children and women who were found vulnerable from the industry. So the decline of the carpet industry meant that then women were out of job. Those who were employed in that sector were out of job and looked for other employment opportunities in informal sector. So most of them took up jobs such as in entertainment work, as entertainment sector, in bricklin, stone quarry, and domestic work. The second is the impact of the armed conflict that lasted for a decade in Nepal from 1996 to 2006 was another reason for women's mobility to urban cities. The war ended at about killing about 19,000 people, and it estimated 15,000 people lost their homes and were internally displaced by war. The conflict not only displaced large number of people, but also led to a large proportion of out-migration of population to urban cities. Some moved to South Asian countries and Gulf countries. Some argue that the young people and women who were displaced by conflict led to few opportunities and would take up any opportunity in urban city for work, and mostly in the informal sector, and often subjected to research suggests they are often subjected to sexual and economic exploitation. And thirdly, more recent 2015 Nepal earthquake that took about 9,000 lives, displaced 2.8 million people. Of them, 70% affected population were living in temporary settlements and mainly remains displaced since then, so creating socioeconomic vulnerabilities through these displacements. Yeah, now finally my research method. Today I'll be not talking about my PhD because this is something, it's more on the trafficking narrative. And part of me looking into migration stories and looking into entertainment sector was stemmed from my own interest while doing my PhD on anti-trafficking responses. Something didn't feel right when talking to people, when talking to NGOs and NGOs, when they would talk about how they are victims, how these women found in entertainment sector are victims of trafficking. That led on to more research that I've been doing since post-PhD. So this particular presentation, I'll be focusing on more recent interviews I've had, informal conversations I've had since COVID, post-COVID. Mostly I've done it online for reasons of travel and everything, but also I contacted a NGO. How I got to know these women who work in entertainment is through an NGO, through various informal discussion, and trying to gain access to them, because they are a group of population who are hidden, often would not come up, speak up about, because the things they do are often considered illegal. So they're hidden, they're scared of talking to people and so forth. So the best way to approach them would be through an NGO that works for their, that provides services. So I did interviews with them, about 20 of them, female entertainment workers. I did a focus group with field staff, outreach workers who work with that NGO, providing various health and rights services. Then I also interviewed the two NGO officials who've opened, who run this NGO. So in this paper, I talk about women in the margin. The idea that why margin? Most of them, the 20 of them I interviewed who took part in my study, had migrated to the city, like I said, were from the age of 19 to 43 years old, had very little education. The maximum they had was up to 8th grade. The reason for migration, when I asked, were for work, family reunion, post-earthquake, displacement, and pandemic, and even COVID pandemic. 1 out of the 20 was a left behind woman. That is, where her husband was working in a Gulf country, never returned back. So she had to be the sole breadwinner of her family. There were also issues around citizenship. The ones who I talked to, like this quote suggests, no ghar, no thar, in Nepali, that in English it means no house, no surname. So basically they have no identity. They are the margins. Why? When I asked the NGO officer, why are they at the margins? Why are there these issues around citizenship? They often get married. These women often get married at a young age. They do not have a citizenship card because the husband leave and they are displaced. So there's nowhere to claim their citizenship. So basically, these women are the ones I interviewed, are pretty much invisible members of the society. They were responsible for taking care of their children when I talked to them. They had to pay rent in the city. They didn't have a house. They had to provide their own education, food, education for their children. This would mean they had to take up any work available to them in that context. Some of them just didn't work as entertainment workers. They also had multiple jobs to get them going. So, for example, they did domestic work. They worked as cleaners in hotels, construction work in shops, and also at the same time worked in entertainment sector. They worked in various establishment within the entertainment sector, such as cabin restaurants, dohori, dance park, and khajagar and street-based sex work. So situating the migrant at work. What was interesting to me when talking to these women is that it was not a linear process. So there was this trajectory where some of the women, most of the women I interviewed had in terms of working in the entertainment sector. The entry would be they would start off as working in a dohori as a waitress or as a cleaner. And then they would proceed on to dance bars because they have more experience working in this entertainment sector, the better way of dealing with customers, serving them food. So they all pretty much work as either dancers or as waitresses. And once they move on from the dohori to dance bar, then they move. After a couple of years, they move to khajagar. Khajagar is like a tea shop, which is often run. They are like shops at the entrance at the start. If you look at it, it looks like any other family-owned restaurant. But with that restaurant, once you go inside, apparently there are rooms where they could serve customers. And there, where they solicit with their clients, is where the sex work actually happens. So often, then this narrative is that all entertainment sectors, there is an overlap with sex work. Actually, when I interviewed these women, they were like, that's necessarily not their experiences. They have the choice. They make those choices as they go along because of various reasons, and then I'll discuss that later in the next slide. And eventually, for some, would mean that once these options are out of the way, they can't work in a dohori because of various situations, or cannot work in dance bar because they are of a certain age. The older you are, there's less chance of you being employed in dance bar. You have to be young, you have to look certain way to be employed in a dance bar. That's what I was told in the interview. So they would move on to street-based sex work. But what when talking to them, often there was this constant reminder that there was this idea of mobility, that they could work in various places. They had the flexibility, they had the freedom to work in different spaces. Hoping to make more money was one of the key reason, but also to do with navigating their work, their children, childcare, and family obligations as well. Another striking thing, what I found in the interviews I did with entertainment workers, was they had multiple identities. They were living multiple identities. So this particular quote is from one of the entertainment workers, where she mentions when talking to having a conversation with a child, like, don't ask your mother what she's doing. She's working to provide food, to provide you food and education. A common thing that emerged through my interviews with young migrant women in the entertainment sector was they lived a dual life. They lived two lives, creating different identities at home and at work. One identity at family as a carer, as a mother, as a wife and a daughter, and another identity as an entertainment worker, a life no one is aware of. All of the migrant women I interviewed had hidden their identity as an entertainment worker, but from their families for fear of judgment and condemnation. Feeling of shame, they would bring shame to their family and stigma associated to entertainment work or sex work. When asked, what do you tell your family and friends about your work? Where do you go? Where do you go? What do you tell when you leave at night? Because most of the, for example, dance bars and the dohoris operate at night. So they have different stories to tell. None of them said they worked in the entertainment sector, with just one exception. The child was old enough to find out on her own. They lie to their family that they work in hospital, doing night shifts, work in shops as salesperson, domestic work as domestic worker, or in garment factory. I'm conscious of the time. So the lived realities. So there was lots of themes emerged through the interviews. There was this constant intersection between gender, poverty, ethnicity of Nepali migrant women in the entertainment sector. Lack of support from husband and family was key. Most of them husband have left them because of they were alcoholics, or they left for another woman, or they went abroad and never came back. So they were pretty much the sole provider of the family in a city, with no support from anyone else. Low skilled, though there was means they had no other alternatives. No regular income, even if they worked as a domestic worker or in a garment factory, or even if they worked in as a salesperson. They did not have regular salary. So even to survive, they had to take up entertainment sector as a work. Some were even preferred entertainment sector over difficult job. That's what they would call construction work, domestic work, and garment factory. So there were multiple reasons as to why they would then continue to work in this sector. Like I said, husband often have left them, so they have no one to provide them. Here are some quotes from the interviews, which sort of suggest as to why they have their lived realities. Some of have worked, like I said, the first one says, I worked as a domestic worker. I used to get 2,000 rupees per month. I had to wash, clean clothes all day. It was tough. Some wouldn't give money. They were quite abusive. My health was not great, so I left the job. Meant that she took up on the job as an entertainment worker. Another worked as a manual laborer for some time. The owner was abusive. I used to steal sand from river and sell it. Police caught me several times doing that. My Didi from village helped me to get a job in entertainment sector. So see, as you can see, they worked in other sectors before they got on to the entertainment sector. And the reason as to why the precarity in the informal sector meant that they had to take up other opportunity that would come their way, to any opportunity that they could come to survive or make a living. Choice of most of the women told that they were brought into the sector through a friend. A friend worked in the entertainment sector, and they got introduced to the entertainment sector, and that's how they started the job. But what was also interesting is that, like I said earlier, women who work in the Hori and dance bar, not all of them actually do sex work. So there was a transition. They would see a friend. When I asked them when did you decide to sort of work in the sex industry, they would say that it comes to a point where they cannot make enough money. They see a friend making more money by going with the customers. Often even the employer makes those implicit sort of claims that you need to go get closer to the customer to be in the job. So that would lead on for them to take the job as sex worker. But also there's an element of choice, and this is where it contradicts with the dominant narrative. They often women are passive victims of abuse. As suggested in the quote, the customer gives an offer, then we decide. There's a negotiation that goes on. It all depends upon me whether I want to go with the customer or not. So there was no element of force in any of the interviews. Having said that, that doesn't say that it's all informed choice. There's very little choice out of the choices they have. So another said, I was working as a construction worker. A friend was working hard. She took me there. No one forced me. I had a choice, although limited, but it was their choice. Another striking thing, which sort of stemmed from the interviews, was there were often women who were navigating work and family. the part of the reason why they choose to work in Khajagar, like I said, there was this trajectory. They would come from Dhuhuri to Dansbar to Khajagar was mainly to do with navigating work and family. So as the quote suggests, I manage everything. I send my kids to school, I go to work, I then come back home after kids come back from school and get housework done after school, give them food, help children with homework. Then I leave for work at around 6 p.m. to 12 p.m. So that's when their work starts. So there was, most of the women often said there was a constant juggle of managing the kids, the work, and this is the reason why most of them have chosen to work in Khajagar, the tea house, because it gives them more flexibility. They are in more control of the time when it comes to managing. And also there's this question around if they work in, for example, in Dansbar or Dhuhuri, these are all night work. So there was, since they do it in a really hidden way, there were questions raised by the landlords or the children as to why are you going out at night. They would prefer a day job, and Khajagar would mean they could go out with customers during the day as well. Yeah, so so these are some of the reasons as to why they would work in the Khajagar as well. So another theme that have emerged from my study is the intersecting realities. There were elements of precarity, vulnerability, exploitation, and even empowerment. To understand such complexity of the lived lives of women migrant workers, as it intersects with host of challenges that must be analyzed. The woman migrant for the studies showed resistance in disclosing the experience of victimization. Most interviewed preferred to either take a neutral stance towards the experienced or express success in overcoming abuse and hardship. In fact, most of them blamed their bhagya, that means destiny, for where they landed up in. Multiple factors contribute to vulnerability and precarity, which the women have experienced. Most precarity and vulnerability and empowerment were experienced at different times and sometimes even simultaneously. There was also this element of blurred lines with work and exploitation. Initially, they were asked to, in the entertainment, in dance bars or dohuris or even Khajagar, they were asked to serve food and drinks to customers, but they were also expected to attract customers, pressurized to sell them more drinks or please their customers. So there was this element of harassment and as well if they would disagree to do so. Physical and psychological violence, including sexual violence, can accompany various forms of exploitation. As against the work, although many, when talking to an NGO worker, she said that the working conditions are much better than before because there are many organizations that are regulating these sectors, and more women are aware of their rights and their working conditions. So they understand what is right and wrong, and hence they would fight for those rights. But then exploitation do exist. As the quote suggests, some clients lie, they bring 2 or 3 people at one time. Some clients are so drunk they don't even give money, they run away. These are some problems. I try to ignore at times, sometimes I argue for money. It all depends upon the situation, how I feel about it. Another striking thing of theme that have emerged from the interviews is the salary. It's varied among interviewees. So for example, one would earn 200 rupees to up to 10,000. It all depended on the way they looked and their age, their experiences. If you have less experiences, then there's more opportunity to make money. So there was also this intersections of addictions and issues around alcohol and drugs, typo. Health issues and such as STI and HIV were pretty common in working in these sectors. Risk, again, associated with disclosures of their identity, social media, press coverage, police raid, being caught and arrested, which I'll discuss later. However, there was also this element of empowerment, this idea that, as the quote suggests, I'm more independent. This work has taught me a lot. I feel empowered. As I learned a lot, I am more confident. I can help my friends as I have experienced. Some of them even fought for their own rights. So one particular interview said that now they're working towards decriminalizing sex work to make it a safe place. If they had card, then they could work more safely. They wouldn't be scared of police taking them, arresting them, or putting them in custody. So there was an element of within these intersections of precarity and vulnerability and exploitation, there was also this element of empowerment which came through working in the sector. One of the main challenges what these women discussed, apart from the exploitation they've experienced through working with different types of clients and working in different establishment, was more at the official level. Police raid. There's lots of research suggesting as to how police raid is hugely problematic when it comes to anti-trafficking interventions. Is one of the most common way of intervention in Nepal. And all of my interviews said that they fear of police raid, and most of them have been in those raids, and how they've shared some horrible experiences being part of this raid. They fear that the family, they might lose income because then they'll be left on the street. They fear that the family will know, because most of them are working, the families don't know that the type of work they do. So there was constant feeling of fear and anxiety through these in their daily life through these police raids. As you can see from the quotations, many cabin restaurants are being shut down. Women are losing income. This is making them more vulnerable and are pushed to the streets. We cannot escape when it happens. The owner does not take responsibility. Police arrest us, place us in custody. We have to delete all phone numbers, cannot name our employers. We have to call our friends to rescue us. And even there's this lots of abuse and harassment when these raids are conducted. They are seen as troublemakers. They are seen as issues around morality when they are caught. In addition to fear, women interviewed faced, like I said, severe harassment and abuse from police. So, for example, there was one particular incident where these women were caught from dance bars. They were basically just working as waitresses. Mind you, they were not caught doing up any illegal activities as well. So what they would do, they were transported. They were taken by the police through the raids. They were made to stand on the middle of the road, and they were asked to dance like they would dance in nursery. They would say that, oh, you can dance in the dance. Well, why can't you dance in front of me? So they were asked to perform in front of in the middle of the road. Or the alternative would be either go to stay a night at the custody, or just do a dance number for them. So those sort of harassments are quite common when it comes to interaction with police. Interesting. Then another form of vulnerability, which some of the NGO workers mentioned, was the local gang members. They are known as Tanya Gunda. What they do is once they know that these women work in the entertainment sector, like I said, it's highly stigmatized. They often they do not tell their family and family as to what they do. They threaten them. Once they know that they are entertainment sector, they would threaten them, they would disclose their identity to their family members, and they ask them to give money or service in return. So that was one of the main sort of the worry for many of these women. In the focus group with the outreach workers, it was noted that there were new forms of vulnerabilities were emerging. One was to do with social media. Media covertly took interviews, often take interviews with owners of Khajagar, pretending to be a customer. They get all the information and then expose them to police. In the age of social media, abuse have moved online. Naming and shaming, harassing, threatening, fear of disclosure of identity, and if they did not cooperate with them. So in fact, that's led on to newer forms of vulnerabilities than what we would see in the past. Some of the coping strategies, like I said, there was also this issues around empowerment and resilience, even despite the fact that they were in this precarious condition. There were various ways as to how these women would cope with their circumstances, including attempting to be less visible when soliciting with clients, working on only contact basis. Some would complain to the owner, take matters in their own hand, or just do nothing about it and let the cycle of abuse to continue. Women would resist at a personal level. They would negotiate with their clients if they did not get money. And often, in case of police raid, one form of resistance would be not telling the truth to the police. They would give fake phone numbers, fake name, fake addresses, tell the police that they will call their sister. Often family are called when to bail out. They are not their sisters, they work in the same sector, but they tell the police that they are sector. There's various ways as to how they would navigate and cope with given the circumstances. Another striking theme that emerged from the interview was this notion of the idea of peer support. Like I said, none of them know as to in the family or relatives know as to the kind of work they do. So the only support they have is either the employer, often they can have some level of support, or friends, peers working in the same sector. Most of them had a group of friends that they could rely on to find a job, for instance, to leave the job, to be rescued in case of police raid. Since it's hidden, we have to back each other. But then also there were cases where they had fallen out. So the idea of social capital was quite significant when it comes to these women in working in the entertainment sector. Social networks, ties, and exchanges between these individuals. Social cohesion, there was the idea of mutual trust and solidarity working in the community. Obligations, expectations, norms, and information sharing. For example, they would only go to the places where her friend has gone just to make sure that the clients are fine, would not be abusive, or there will be no police raid. So these are some of the strategies they would apply, and are also seen as a form of social capital. So almost say a few slides on the NGO's experience if I have time. I don't know how much time I have, but please do let me know if I'm going overboard. I know Ayushman has to present as well. But this, like I said, I've talked to this NGO. I'm not going to name the NGO because of anonymity and confidentiality, but I'd like to talk a bit about the history about this NGO. It's the first.
Shovita, sorry to interrupt you. You could finish in 5 minutes. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Sure. Okay. So I've changed her name to Radha. She worked in the entertainment sector in dance restaurant herself for 18 to 19 years. She left the entertainment sector and then formed an NGO working towards protecting the rights of entertainment workers. She received once she exited the entertainment sector, she received various trainings from various organizations on health awareness. And during my interview with with Radha, she stated that since she worked in the entertainment sector, she could understand the challenges these women face than no one else. She stated that there's lots of NGOs that work on protecting the rights of entertainment workers, but then their needs are never addressed because they do not have that experience what she has. The NGO got registered in 2006. It's one of the first NGOs who works on STI, HIV, and AIDS prevention. It's part of a global network of sex work project, and also the South Asian Pacific network. They also work in the national level network. When I asked whether their voices are heard in policy making, especially in anti-trafficking laws, she mentioned that they were invited at the initial phase of lawmaking, but then their voices were never heard. They would go to attend these network meetings, but they were often neglected, which meant that she would stop going to these. The organization would stop going to these national level meetings. So the NGO solely focuses on service delivery more than activism because of funding restrictions. She mentioned that the attitude towards entertainment workers and female sex workers are slowly changing. But also she mentioned that the government have to acknowledge that these women exist as well. They are the margins, but they exist. They need to be treated as citizens of this country, like the rest of the female population. And one thing they are advocating, she mentioned during the interview, she also mentioned that the sex workers movement is gaining momentum in Nepal. The female sex workers issues are being raised in conversations with government and NGOs. And one of the first rally was held in December 16th last year, in the 16-day activism period by the NGO, which is seen as one of the huge a huge progress made in sex workers' rights movement. And I didn't think so I have time to say this, but I'll quickly say that there were instances of existing programs as well, but there are challenges existing in entertainment sector because of several reasons. If they are offered a training, for example, full day, 10 days training, they are doing this training, but then they are daily wage workers. What alternative? Then they need to provide their family. So if they attend the trainings, then that means that they can never make their living for those 10 days. So there were questions around that as well. Some of the challenges of outreach worker, I talked to outreach workers as well. So some of the challenges were working with entertainment workers and female sex workers is some of them with drug and alcohol abuse often go missing. They are not easy to find. They keep moving houses, they keep moving locations, so they're difficult to track. The police raid have also led them to further unintended consequences. They move away, they switch their mobile phones, they cannot find in their work, they go missing for days. They have to find, they move to a new place, find a new home and work. They find it through their peers. And also another challenge which the outreach workers face is that media incidents happen, and often they are mistaken as sex workers as well because they work in this area. So to conclude, quickly conclude, when trafficking is viewed with reference to prostitution, the focus is typically on victimization, criminality, and morality. Then there is concern becomes about regulating human bodies and sexual behaviors. Such is evident in my research context as well, as Laura Augustine challenges the stereotypes, arguing that the label of trafficked does not accurately describe migrants' lives, and the rescue industry serves to disempower them. The current responses, such as police raid, impacts those female migrants who are making the choices to work in the entertainment sector for reasons such as no regular income, lack of support, health issues, and lack of other alternatives. In the case of Nepal, the systematic and structural factors manifest in themselves in various forms, like lower wages of female migrants, stigma, abuse, disclosure of identity, and police arrest, and barriers to social and legal institutions. Those working in entertainment sectors, as identified in the research, face several challenges: risk, abuse, harassment, online abuse, and exposure, but they also are able to navigate work in these precarious conditions. The main focus these NGOs have is preventing from HIV and AIDS rather than activism, rather than addressing needs, concerns around labor conditions. The voices of entertainment work are therefore yet to be heard. While organizations are lobbying for decriminalization of sex work, there are sets of challenges with that as well. I suggest that there should be some strategies developed which could address issues around entertainment faced by entertainment workers, abuse, health, and labor more effectively, for example, such as access to legal and social institutions in cases of abuse by employers, clients, or police authorities. NGOs need to continuously push the agenda of female entertainment workers' rights, with government bodies reaching out to government agencies, parliament, police, ministries, and local level government, highlight their experience of violence and abuse, such as suicide, alcohol, and drug addiction. More evidence-based research on issues such as citizenship, issues relating to children in entertainment sectors, an area for future research. More importantly, I'd like to end my presentation by that we need to continually reflect, engage in debates with policymakers, academics, and practitioners on issues with these migrant workers face. Questions such as how to approach these migrant women who choose to take up employment opportunities that pose certain level of risk. How do they engage or negotiate as a part of the agencies? What can be learned from our past mistakes, strategies? How can risk be better managed? Yes, thank you for listening, and I'll end my presentation here. Thanks. I think I went a bit over, but.
Okay, thank you, Shovita. Thank you so much for this thought-provoking presentation about your research. Ayushman, are you there?
Yeah, hi.
Hi. Will you be able to share
Yes.
your presentation?
Yes.
Yes, we'll have the opportunity to ask Shovita when Ayushman finishes, and we can ask them both. If you've got any questions while Ayushman is presenting, you can type those in these in the chat. Ayushman, do you know how to? Yeah, there you go.
Is it good?
Yes, I can see those. Yes, I can see the presentation. Okay, the floor is yours, Ayushman.
Thank you so much. Wait, how will I be able to? Just give me a moment, please. How to move the presentation, by the way? Like.
Oh.
Yeah, when you share it, are you sharing it now? Because I can't see your slides now.
No. Okay.
No.
So if you go down, Ayushman, you need to share content. It takes a while to upload as well.
Is it good?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, you can see it.
Yes.
Are you able to see? And is it moving? Madagascar?
Yes, it is moving. Yes.
Yes.
Number 2.
Great.
Yes.
Madagascar is clear. This is important. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much, Shovita, for your thought-provoking presentation, as Maria said, and thank you so much for inviting me to deliver a talk about my particular research that I'm doing in Nepal. And I think this is actually a perfect fit because I mean Shovita is talking about internal migration, sort of, and I will be I'm trying to understand international migrant, and both are basically like trying to in a way problematize the debate of trafficking. But in today's presentation, I'm not going to talk about my like research and findings and everything. But today's presentation, I will be talking about a concept which I'm trying to like theorize, and that concept is concept of failure, right? And I'm really trying to engage with this particular concept and trying to understand, how to conceptualize it in a way that is not only helpful for the those researchers who go out there, and there is a pressure on them to streamline their research in order to show that they are successful, and at the same time it it problematizes the entire debate of human trafficking. Yeah. So before like I start like how I'm trying to like think with failure, I just want all of you to think about what is failure, right? I mean, this is the first question that comes to our mind, is what exactly is the term called failure? Yeah. And I think this is a very flawed question, to be honest, because I mean the very functionality of the grammar is in this particular question demands a successful engagement with the term to make its content visible, right? And this is where I'm like drawing upon non-representative geographer, non-representational geographer who are trying to problematize like words and how word actually create a world around us. But then, I mean, the question comes, how to give a description of that which has no content without saying that it does not exist? Because clearly it does, right? This is something which we experience every day, and especially whenever we go and do research, we experience failure. Now, its existence is something which is felt deeply, yet its content is blindness in the middle of our vision, right? Despite its effective presence, because clearly it invokes various sorts of emotions in us, and I'll talk about different kind of emotion that failure invoked in me during the research. But yes, despite its effective presence, failure is not at all material. By material, I mean it really cannot be made intelligible by any sense organs, right? Whatever you do, it would not you will not be able to make sense of failure using your sense organ. However, we all worry about it. some people accept it, some people do celebrate it, and and some people worry about it as well, and many, and the most important, I think, problem with this particular term is basically when people try to transform into something which is not that. So there is a really neoliberal capitalistic connotation is here. So, but these engagements are determined by failure's utter obscurity, experienced as an existential structure, right, which basically shapes our life, right? So the moment we try to position failure as an existential structure, which delimits our life, we are understanding failure as some form of limit, right? It stands outside us. Yeah.
Ayushman, sorry to interrupt. We are still seeing the first slide. Are you
Yes,
moving through that?
No, I'm not
Oh,
talking about
okay.
Madagascar.
Oh,
Second slide is
okay.
about Madagascar. First slide, I'm
Okay.
trying to theorize, understand the complexity of failure before, jumping into like my research
Okay.
and everything. Is that
Great.
okay? Or am I
Yeah, good.
being
No,
too
that's
theoretical
fine.
here?
That's fine. Absolutely.
Okay, so what I was talking about, yes, so failure is basically, in a way, it's kind of a limit, right? It stands outside us, right? It basically, you do anything, you try to address it beforehand, all these like ethical regulations that we all go through while we try to write research. It basically, like, you really don't know what is going to happen in the field, despite of the fact that you try to take all sorts of precaution, especially when you are doing qualitative research. In my case, participatory action research. So I mean, it's something which is very, very hard to grasp, right? And we are exposed to it, right? And this is something which we all experience. Whoever has done research in the field has experienced that, right? And there are different boons and there are different burdens of it. But the problem is we really try to get rid of it. And feminist geographers in particular, like Gillian Rose, they all have problematized this particular idea of getting rid of something which is called as failure, right? So what I'm going to do in this particular presentation is I will be drawing upon the participatory action research that I did in one community in Nepal, and I'll try to illuminate that confronting failure in all sorts of qualitative research, it allows us to confront gross inequality of everyday life. And in my case, which is created by a very toxic debate of human trafficking. Yeah. So Shovita has clearly set the ground about human trafficking, but I will take a little bit of funny turn in human trafficking debate and will ask this particular question. How many of you have seen the movie Madagascar? It basically, I mean, I was watching last night and all of a sudden I realized, this is basically talks. Basically, the whole, we can use this particular movie Madagascar 2 in particular to problematize the entire debate of human trafficking. And I know it sounds funny, but I mean, just wait for it. So in Madagascar, what's happening, right? I mean, in the first version, they went out like to visit, and all of a sudden, people did not accept these people. So as long as you are working in exploitative conditions, it's perfectly fine. And the moment you go out, there is a problem, right? In Madagascar 2, they go to New York in a zoo. So I'm not able to understand the understanding of this particular narrative, because they are getting into a carceral space. Yeah. So what is happening, and this is something which perplexes most of the anti-trafficking organizations, because they think that how can people go and work in these exploitative conditions? And as Shovita already mentioned, that these people have, they really do not, these NGOs do not understand the limited choice that many of the women have, right? So, and then there are so many things which I'll not bore with you, but the whole idea of trafficking narrative, and especially anti-trafficking narrative, now the whole thing is moving towards modern slavery, is extremely flawed. People are trying to selectively address certain issues, and we all have no critical scholars for the last 25 years have been problematizing this particular thing as collateral damage, right? So rather than these new quote unquote abolitionists who are trying to abolish certain forms of labor relations or exploitation in labor relations, I think we do need to abolish a society in which exploitation occurs in the first place. Exploitation, oppression, rightlessness occurs in the first place, right? And in this particular presentation, I'll actually take you towards that particular insight or understanding through the notion of failure, right? So before I get into my research, I'll talk about a little bit about myself, who I am, where I am coming from, and what kind of failures that has shaped my own subjective experience. Right. So I'm essentially a participatory development professional from India, and I've worked in like forest and all, and trying to understand, how people actually try to, like protect and govern natural resources around them. And of course, there was labor associated with this and all. So during that particular time when I was working in forest, and at that time, no trafficking, nothing is happening, but people were trying to do like environment conservation and everything. We used to face a lot of challenges, right? I mean, and in NGO, we had the understanding that whenever you go out and work within a community, then you are definitely going to face failure. So it's a sort of acceptable failure it was there, right? So whenever we were going to do any sort of work, community sometimes were rejecting us, but as a part of an NGO, we were supposed to do something because we have already raised fund to do that. So there is a problem in the entire discourse of development, but at the same time, we fail to understand what exactly community wants. We fail to understand how communities really do not want us in so many ways, but still people try to force this. And this is perhaps one of the problems with anti-trafficking NGOs as well. They are doing that maybe people really do not want. Now, after that, I try to I work with labor department as a consultant in a bonded labor project in Uttar Pradesh, in brick kilns, and all these these people are casting it as modern slavery at the moment, but in India we really do not use that particular term. We use the term called bonded labor. Now, the entire project was Canadian government funded project. It failed because of the reluctance of employers, because of the reluctance of people, because really, I mean, there is no way you can go and address these kind of issues, and people are working very hard to do that, but there is they are trying to selectively address the problem, and of course the whole thing is kind of a mess. And that actually created frustration because I was coming from a very, very participatory background, and all of a sudden I was in a policy space and nothing was working. So, I mean, I left that particular thing and I worked with the ILO for 3 years, and I basically implemented a project on labor, quote and unquote, labor trafficking, which was there in India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and different Middle East and Jordan and all. What happened? I mean, recently, a lot of London school scholars, they have published a report and they have problematized this particular project as well. And they say that, there is something which is not working. And I was like, when I was working like in 2014 or 2015, as a consultant, I actually experienced it because I was also not sure that why the hell we are doing whatever we are doing in the field. Yeah. So there were some issues. Of course, there were good part, but there were bad parts as well, and that actually created frustration because I was wondering why the hell people are not listening to those people who are targets of anti-trafficking debate, who really try to whose lives are affected. Nobody in the ILO, all the United Nations and all these people like us, we are not going to get trafficked, I hope so, but those people who are directly impacted by the debate, nobody was listening to it. No, nobody was listening to them. And as a result of that, I decided to write a PhD thesis. And I was like, I really want to bridge this particular gap and try to, bring out people's voices and see that, whether and how, how this particular, the debate of trafficking and modern slavery and whatnot is impacting people, right? So what I'm trying to do here is by telling you my short biography, I'm trying to tell you that every time, I've changed jobs, it was to, get rid of certain forms of failure, right? So, and this failure was creating, a lack in me as well. Failure here could be understood as a cluster of affective mode, because every time I was switching jobs, every time I was encountering challenges and messiness, and every time I thought that how organizations I was working with was trying to get rid of that particular messiness, it basically created more messiness, So it's basically failure could be understood here as a cluster of affective modes, right? Which invokes a lot of emotions. And there was this, from my side as well, there was this concerted effort to transpose instances of these testimonial failure into a positive register, right? There was this, like the most of the people, thought at that time that failure is something which is bad, and we really need to get rid of it in order to get into something which is like siloed as success, right? And really it was important at that time to investigate the material places and conditions that gave rise to them, and that's perhaps the only reason why I think I did PhD. so I mean, yeah. Then I went to Nepal, and and I like went inside one particular community which was like in up north in China border, and I lived in that particular community. But before I get into the story, I just want to give you like to explain the internal migration and internal like problems related to anti-trafficking debate. But there is an external problem as well, right? Sex work, as Shovita said, that it's like problematized. But not only labor is problematized, mobility is also problematized as well. So those people who want to go for sex work from Nepal, I mean, there are a lot of anti-trafficking NGOs along this Indo-Nepal border, and they really do not allow people to go, right? They detain them. Women's labor, and to make the matter worse, women's labor mobility to domestic work in Middle East is also banned. I really don't know. I mean, whether they have removed the ban at the moment. I mean, I think Shovita can tell me whether the ban is still there, which was imposed by the government of Nepal in 2017. So, I mean, clearly women are not allowed to go for sex work. Women are not allowed to go for domestic work. But the problem is, thanks to kafala system or whatnot, people can sponsor employees from Middle East, so they can issue individual like visa. So I mean, in order to go to Middle East, women who want to go for domestic work has to become quote and unquote like take irregular channel. You can say illegal, whatever, but women has to take irregular channel in order to enter into Middle Eastern country legally. Now, this is something which is very, very interesting because Middle Eastern country want Nepalese labor, but Nepal government is not allowing people to move. And this basically changes and demands a critical investigation of the overinvestment of, overinvestment of the process, which, which is basically very Euro and American centric, where people are not allowed to enter into certain locations, right? But here the thing is people are not allowed to leave their own nation state in order to go to other countries, which are very much happy to issue visa and all those sort of things. So people have to become, in a way, and I know that there is a problem in this statement, have to become illegal in order to become a legal migrant in these Middle Eastern spaces, right? So this is a very, very complicated case which requires us to rethink not only critical migration studies, but critical border studies, critical carcerality study, and security studies, and everything. But because it requires us to flip the very Eurocentric, Euro and American centric lenses that we use to understand migration in a critical fashion. Now, I stayed here, somewhere here, went inside the community, and so I mean, so initially when I went inside the community, I requested that whether I can do the research, and they're like, okay, this is perfectly fine, during the scoping study, and they said that you can come and do the research and everything. But the moment that I enter into the village, I saw that the whole village is divided, right? And it was basically a post-disaster village we are talking about, right? I mean, not even a single household was intact, as you can see in the picture. If it is clear, I'm not sure, but as you can see in the picture, that all these houses are under construction, right? These are asbestos houses. This means that there was not even a single house which was intact after the 2015 earthquake that happened in Nepal. So people were reconstructing and everything, and people told me that nobody is going to engage with you in the research unless you create some sort of like some sort of like develop some sort of like meeting, and and I was like, okay, let's create a space where we can bring everybody together. So we basically did some sort of general meeting. If you can see here, yes. So initially, after rapport building, we actually organized a meeting in the community, and and we started having a conversation about what kind of research we want to do. And the whole community told me that there is a problem with the mobility. A lot of men who migrate from community go to Malaysia. They they have to become illegal because of the certain issues. And they were talking about male migration. They were not talking about female migration. They were not talking about sex work and domestic work or whatnot. They were saying that no, our boys, our sons, they go there and there is an issue over there. We do need to solve that. And I'm like, okay, great. And we do need to understand the mobility pattern first so that we can do something about it. Now, what happened was during the meeting, people told me very clearly that, look, I know what you are here for. There are a lot of people who have come before you, and believe it or not, you are not going to get what you want. And I was like, it's perfectly fine. What would you say in those circumstances? So community actually said that, following traditional pattern of, all these anti-trafficking interventions or any development intervention, they told me that why don't you form a committee, kind of a steering committee in the community, which would actually, oversee the entire project. And I said, okay. And then we took permission, and then, we registered it as well. Now, through that particular community, we selected certain, people to do research with me, and there were like 5 people with 5 different subject positions were selected, and then we discussed, we sat together, and then we realized that we do need to go outside in order to understand the whole community as a whole. So basically, like sort of a training process. That training was not me giving them training was basically them giving training to me about the ways community functions, right? So we went outside the community in Melamchi, and we had 2.5 days of in-house participatory training with like 5-6 people, and then when there was a clarity, and then we did a lot of participatory exercise during that particular meeting, and when there was a clarity of what exactly we are trying to do, we actually went inside the community, and we are like, okay, now we can actually think about solving the problem of mobility through the constitution of village resource center. So I was like, okay, information resource center. And I was like, all right, we can do that, and if the community wants it, why not? So we decided to, start our activities. But before we went into that, we thought that it would be really nice to have a safe space for action and reflection. One of the big part of participatory action research is the spiral process of action and reflection. So I thought, it would be really nice if community can give us one of the space where we can sit together. And we sat together. We found a place. We sat together for really every week. We were sitting. Every week we were discussing what we wanted to do, what kind of research we were supposed to do, and what kind of data we have collected, how to analyze that data, and and then see what are the problems, what are the challenges, and what are the opportunities in that particular intervention. So this happened, and then after a couple of weeks, we decided that it's really time that all these like 5 peer researchers, whom I call as research companions as well, they will go out, they will create their own groups in village, small groups in their habitations, and we'll start focus group discussion activity. So where we were going out, we were doing focus group discussion, coming up with data, and we were trying to analyze it in our safe space. Now, what happened was, during that time, we started selecting people at that particular. We didn't start with interview. We waited till for 2 months, I think, and then we started, like interviewing people, and people were coming up with names. We were like analyzing, we were like discussing these names, and then we were trying to interview, and we interviewed a lot of people as well. And on the basis of that, there were quite a lot of routes that were evolved. However, immediately after that, when we were like moving towards the formation of information center, many people told me that please do not do that, right? If you do it, chances are very high that you might create more problem than you will solve it, right? So I decided not to do that particular thing, and then I move on. And I went to do this particular border ethnography in like Indo-Nepal border. These were like 4 bordering sites. And I went there and I conducted short ethnography over there, and I saw some really crazy stuff. One of these is this. As you can see, there are 3 women here sitting, and they're like, their faces are covered, and they are quote and unquote intercepted by anti-trafficking organizations because they didn't tell them where they are going. And imagine, Indo-Nepal border is open for everyone, but these women are not allowed to go. So and they are detained in their own country, and from there they were taken to these women usually go to some sort of transit home, which I think is a detention center, and from there they are deported back to their own village. So this also changes everything that we know about immigration detention and deportation. So, and this happened something in front of me, and I failed to do anything at that particular moment. Now, after that, I did this particular, walk. So I started with the village. I traced one particular route that people take to go to Middle East to work as domestic worker. So this village, they went to Kathmandu. If you can see this woman, she belonged to anti-trafficking organization, and her job is to just see who is going where and make the register and all. Then I went to Delhi, where these people arrive, my participants arrive, and they just vanish because they live in Majnu Ka Tila. It's a Tibetan refugee colony, and the community that I did research with, that Tamang community, and they prefer this particular site. And then Delhi airport, there used to be, at that time when I did research, there used to be a separate counter for Nepalese people. So I mean, I interviewed a lot of people. Then I went to Colombo because many of my participants go to Colombo, and then if you can see these two women, they are like they are doing exactly the same thing that this particular woman is doing here in Nepal. And then I went to Kuwait airport and tried to understand what happens when these people enter into such spaces legally. So I'm sorry. Actually, I have a cold. I've just arrived from the States 2 days ago, and I'm really jet lagged, and I got some very bad cough. Cold. So this is basically how my data looks like. We did a lot of exercise in the community, and we created like massive pool of data, because the whole idea was to create some sort of information resource center, which I could not. Total timeline is 7.5 months. Scoping study was for 1 month. Then I lived in village, and we did on the move ethnography as well. Now, one of the most interesting fact about this particular research is, every time I did anything, it basically comprises of failures, right? So, for example, during rapport building, people told me that, we are not going to give you anything. We know what you're doing here. And I'm like, it's perfectly fine. During a selection of interpreter, there was this one person who was rescued from Indian brothels. She started working with me, and over the period of time, because of her family restrictions, she was not allowed to work with me, right? During interview, a lot of interviewers, they left, in between the interview. During focus group discussion, a lot of questions was asked directed to me, because they thought that I have amassed a lot of money and I'm maybe a spy or something like that. And of course, the biggest failure of this particular method was, sorry, failure of information center. Because community resisted that. And this is a very, very popular anti-trafficking intervention at the moment in Nepal, and a lot of information centers people are making in several wards. And the community where I did research, they say that no, please don't do that, because most of the people actually migrate irregularly, and they say that because of your intervention could be a bordering intervention in the community. You will not really problematize all of a sudden. You will make sure that the community is visible to the world, and this is something which they have been historically trying to undo. And this is something which is, again, I mean, I'll quickly tell you some of the findings, and then we'll move towards the failures as well. So the whole community is very interesting. Like 200 years ago, women from that community used to go to serve Rana palaces, kings of Nepal, and once as concubines, domestic workers, entertainment workers and all. And once that was over, there was a coup in 1951. A lot of people, a lot of Ranas went to India. Yeah, they utilized this open border and they went to India, and a lot of women afterwards, because there was no job and all those sort of things, and quite a lot of women decided to leave Rana's palace. And some scholars, some Nepalese scholars also say that a lot of Ranas actually sold these women to Indian brothels. However, what happened was quite a lot of people joined Indian brothels, and over the period of time, they started their own enterprise, and they started returning back to the community, and started like recruiting, right, for sex work in India. Now, what happened as a result of that? It was happening in like 80s and everything, and in community, everyone was going for sex. So most of people used to tell me that most of the people in the community, every household have one member at some point in time working in Indian brothels. However, that stopped thanks to the narrative of anti-trafficking in 90s, and there were different raid and rescues, and women were stigmatized as disease carriers, and there were so many things that happened during that particular time. A lot of people started, because of, especially I think because of fear of HIV/AIDS, the stigma became a thing in the community. But then at the same time, Nepal government allowed people to go to Middle East. They started going to Middle East for domestic workers. But then, a lot of suicides started happening, a lot of beatings and rapes started happening in Middle East, and people, state started problematizing the mobility of women to Middle East, like in 27. And they were like, I mean, there's 10 years, there is a history of 10-year-long mobility ban on women's migration to Middle East. Now, the problem is that ban is there. Still, people go to Middle East through irregular channel, as I've already mentioned previously. Now, most of the people are entering into a new regime. That's Europe. They are coming towards Europe as to work as domestic work sector and everything. So, I mean, the whole idea of the PhD was to theorize, this particular complexity, right? So, and if you try to understand the whole data, all these methodological failure, I mean, methodology or the conceptualization, everything, whatever we did with the whole trafficking debate, right? I mean, during my PhD, I basically encountered failures every time I did anything. Now, failure basically, I mean, we can try to understand failure as as a lens to understand things, which would actually allow you to understand so many different things. That's why I put this picture of failure as many-headed hydra. Right. I mean, the problem is we really want to get rid of it. And that's the problem with the debate of this like neoliberal academy, which forces us to be successful, right? Which forces us to show impact. Yeah. So it's I mean, I feel its failure here is like sort of map of political paths which have not taken. Now, I mean, I'm not essentializing failure here. What I'm saying is we do need to, first and foremost, we do need to accept that you will fail, especially you do. And it doesn't matter whether you are doing human trafficking or whatnot. Whatever you are doing, you will fail. I mean, and I'll tell you one thing, and then I'll move on to some instances of failure. So when I was leaving, the last day when I was about to leave the community, some people told me that one of my friend told me that community member fooled you, because many people still have connections with sexual connections with Indian brothels. A lot of people actually go to Indian brothel to work as well. So people have fooled you. So can you imagine the kind of power relation I was into? As a feminist critical scholars, we are supposed to understand the positionality and where you live in the community, and you think that your positionality won't like you will be able to streamline your positionality. However, you have no idea what kind of power relationship I was in. I have no idea whether and how the representation I am doing here is basically makes sense or not. And believe it or not, I returned back to the community last year, and I presented the entire finding and everything. And one of the first questions that community asked, so how did you represent our community in the world? Because we know that things are very complicated. How did you do that? And believe it or not, that was much more difficult than PhD Viva. So yes, so in that case, what I'm trying to say here is whenever it's very important to grapple with the complexity of the messiness of research. It's very important to understand failure as not to change something, but to embrace it, but to confront a failure, so that you can see the larger inequality that's basically is being presented. So what I'll do here is I'll actually talk about certain events, right? And in all these cases, you will see how I was taken aback, right? And then we'll see how to conceptualize failure. Now, the first story is story of a girl. Now, imagine it's like minus 11 degree outside, and you are in a hut. There's no heater and everything, and you are trying to sleep in the afternoon because you have completed your work. All of a sudden, you hear a knock on the doors. You open it, and you see a 7-year-old girl standing in front of you. And the girl says in a very broken Hindi that, could you please bring my mother back? I had no idea how to answer that particular question. I was taken aback. I was lost of words. Then, then I did further probing, and then I realized that I met his father on a bus while coming from Kathmandu to village, and the father asked this question: that why the state does not allow women to migrate to Middle East. I have to take my wife to Delhi, and I have to give her to an agent so that the agent can facilitate the migration properly. You know, so he was in a way trying to subvert the borders of trafficking that he encountered, and I had no idea at that time how to respond as well. Participant, there are lots of stories of participants. I'll tell you one. That recently happened. A participant of mine a few months ago, he messaged me on Facebook. He said, we are in Romania and a fellow person committed suicide because we are not getting jobs here. What to do? Because we have taken a lot of debt in order to enter into quote and unquote Europe. So I really don't know what to say at that time. And of course, the agent. The first question that I asked to agent, that who is an agent, and he said that who is not an agent. The way is structured, the whole structure of anti-trafficking in Nepal, the act that Shovita was talking about, can potentially criminalize everyone who supports irregular migration in Nepal, from Nepal. So I mean, and when I asked community members to introduce me to agent, they said no way they can introduce me to agent, because I will go and they have to live with the agent. And of course, I have covered this impact as well. So in all cases, I failed to find right words, and I am still haunted by these difficult questions that was asked to me by participants, by agents. Some people told me that why people from certain political group are allowed to leave irregularly, why not us? So every time I encountered these questions, words definitely failed me. And this sense of failure brought me closer to fabulous feminist geographers who have been writing about it for the last 20 years. Jill Rose, John Houghton, and all. And they all feminists, these all feminist and queer researchers who have talked about these moments of discomfort during the research. They have been trying to push this particular agenda in geography and largest discipline as well. For example, Gillian Rose, in her seminal work on situated knowledges, reminds us there is an ethical necessity to embrace and engage with events, these events that I talked about, that bring our difficulties home to us. Houghton elaborates on this and argues that the shadow of such sense of failure, self-doubt, self-beating will always persist whenever we are doing research. Attempting to address these moments takes us back to these moments, and there is no way you can potentially get into the heart of the matter. So, I mean, the whole idea here, what Houghton is trying to say, Gillian Rose is trying to say, is to embrace the complexity of failure, and complexity of the event, and see the larger problems. In this particular, the larger problem is, the state's regulations, a state hopeless attempt to control women's body sexuality through laws and regulations and everything. And I think it's very, very important to see the larger picture which failure is pointing us to. However, I do understand that when you are tracing one particular route, you are not tracing a lot of route that particular event is highlighting to. So anyway, it's basically you will keep on moving in circles when you try to theorize something which is failure. So in conclusion, I'll basically encourage, I'm sure there must be some PhD students and all researchers who are trying to go to field and do research and all. We do need to move beyond, failure as a fixed or pre-given category. Now, what happens is when we consider who decides what failure is and what not, somebody else has decided for us, and we are basically emoting out of that, right? So it weeds out the role of the language, and this is something which is very important according to which shapes meaning of failure. So it's very, very important to move beyond failure as a pre-given category. Now, second is an objective event which could be defined and measured. And this is basically, another problem with this like whole neoliberal academy, that we do need to measure that, right? Now, the problem is when you try to consider failure as an objective event, which most other people, open YouTube, a lot of people were like, oh no, this is how you succeed. So what they are doing is, in a way, they are reducing the complexity of both social and subjective experience, shaped by emotions, values, and cultural norms. So as a refusal to conform to the expectations and demand of the status quo, in a way, these universal classification distracts us from the ethical urgency, which Jill Rose was talking about, of opening up to new possibilities, right? So it's a very failure as a method could be a very good way to embrace, the unknown and uncertain, I believe. Now, third is the cognitive process of evaluating performance, and this is one of the criticism of neoliberal academia as well, because when you convert failure into something which is very cognitive of process of evaluating performance, what you are doing is you are removing shame, embarrassment, disappointment that basically we feel during our research, even during these presentations as well. And in terms of neoliberal research, research in particular, the neoliberal academy that we all are in, it asks us to smoothening the weird, like very unshaped edge of research process. The social researchers often create, when we try to do that, social researchers often create sense of illusion of linear clarity and fog, self-doubt, and many mistake and everything. And I think this kind of camouflaging of failure is really unhelpful. Yeah. And we became complicit in what, like Michel Foucault says, subjugation of knowledge, right? Now, moral judgment of individual and community, and Shovita also talked about this particular issue as well, that people basically target the community, and I think this is something which we do need to move beyond, because it will distract from the structural and systematic factors. Because of these factors, structural and systematic issues, women's conditions are like that. Because of these factors, they have been given choice to either die out of poverty or to do these kind of stuff, whatever they do, right? And it contributes in so many ways, these kind of because a lot of people say in Nepal, because there is the whole reason why the entire place is stigmatized where I did my research is because of the moral judgment, and people are trying to undo that kind of a stigma for the last, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years. Yeah. So I think it's very important to move beyond that moral judgment of an individual and community, which will distract us. And I think rather than doing that, we do need to understand there's the shared responsibility that requires a collective support and solidarity, and we all have to engage with the socio-political complexity of that and try to make sense out of it. And there are so many, it's like multi-headed hydra that we are dealing here with, and I really don't, and I really don't know. And I think it's okay to say I don't know. So I think I'll stop talking, and I'm just I've started to theorize this particular notion, and I know it's very complicated, and I'm really, I'll be very happy and grateful if you have some suggestions and comments on how to better conceptualize this particular concept of failure, because even though I'm trying to do that, I am failing to conceptualize failure. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Ayushman. That was very, very interesting presentation, actually. And I'm sure all here in this virtual room, we had the opportunity to think about our own experience and see how the many times we are confronting failure throughout the process of doing research in such a hostile environment, I'd say. So it's a very interesting. Before I've got questions for you and for Shovita, of course, but I'd like to first to ask the audience whether there is someone who wants to connect a micro or write their the questions in the chat for these two excellent presenters. Can answer those, and we'll start discussing while people are thinking. I've got a couple of questions, one for Shovita and for you. Oh, I've got someone, Wendy Bloise. Did you want to connect? Yes, hi, Wendy.
Right, you're not going to get my video. I don't know why. I can't seem to do it on Collaborate.
It's fine.
Yeah, so I'm head of partnerships in the university, and I don't know, Shovita, if you're aware that we have a very successful partnership in Nepal where we run our Bachelor of Administration and also MBA and computer courses, BScs in computer science in Kathmandu, Adhikari and Pokhara. So I am also doing research, but my research is looking at raising standards through the power of education, which obviously fits with our mission. So I think I'd really like to connect with you and your group. Because with my other research hat, I actually research in abusive work practices. So I have actually also done, with a former student, we presented about migrant workers in Oman, and some of those were Nepali workers. So I think as well, that's somewhere else. And with my other hat, I'm getting, you see, well, you can't see how old I am, but I used to also work in the hospitality industry. So a lot of what you said is about emotional labour. And again, so I think I will be joining your research group. And certainly it would be brilliant, because I don't know any other Nepali academics in the university, if you could actually join us, and my colleague Hazel's here as well, in some of the research we're doing. So I think we need to be a bit more joined up maybe in the university. And also I'll be able to practice my bad Nepali on you. Okay. But great, lovely, both of you, thank you very much. That was really interesting. And there's no such thing as failure in research.
Yeah. Thank you, Wendy. Shovita, did you want to answer? Did you want to say something?
Thank you, Wendy. Hazel, thanks. That's brilliant to know that you are working in Nepali context. I'm really new to this place, so, and I joined when everybody was in COVID time and everything. So getting to know who's, and it's really nice. And thanks for the opportunity for me to present today. And Ayushman and myself, we both work in the same field, so it'll be nice to collaborate more with other universities as well. So I hope this will lead on to further collaboration. Thanks.
I'll email you. I'll email both of you. Okay. Dhanyabad.
Thanks. Dhanyabad.
Thank you. Natasha.
Hi, Shovita. That was brilliant, really interesting. I just had a question. You mentioned that you did your research interviews online because of, travel limitations. I just wondered what what your experience of that was compared to going out in the field, because it's, it's a very hidden population, and, how you kind of manage that actually online. It's really impressive.
Shall I answer that? Marie, shall I answer?
Yes, of course. Yes, go ahead, Shovita.
Yeah, for me, I had the same worry as well. So it's online, they are hidden population. How do I reach? I mean, they might not have access to internet, and all of this were my worries as well. But like I said, I have been in conversation with this particular NGO who works with them really, really closely for the past few years. We've been trying to develop a project with them because it's very more participatory as to what I'm doing. So this through these discussions, they promised me that there is a group of people who they can put me in touch with, and there's nothing like barriers to do with having not they invited them because they are service users as well. So for that NGO, like they take medicine, all HIV related program, STI program, so they come to the clinic for various services. So the arrangement was such that they would come to get the service and also talk with me for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour. So that was the arrangement. And it's because I think I have a really good relationship with the NGO that was possible. If I was on my own, I wouldn't be able to reach to those women through. But having said that, in retrospect, I think it helped online as well because they are so hidden, right? So they didn't see my face. I didn't see their face. So they were more open to talking about it because they didn't know. And they already had this sort of idea as to who am I from NGO workers. So that had made that, I think the conversation was easier as well. So I don't think online is actually was not a bigger challenge. I thought it would be, but I would definitely love to go back again. This is something I'm continuing. It's ongoing research. So they've asked me to come to their workplace. They've asked me to visit those areas to see firsthand experiences. But this is something I'll do when I go back to Nepal, hopefully somewhere over the years. But then, yeah, for now it was online. But yeah, it was, yeah. So Gatekeeper, I think, was crucial for me, the NGO who I contacted to get in touch. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That
Definitely.
makes lots of sense.
Thank you. Thanks, Shovita and Natasha. Hazel, you've got your hand raised.
I did. Hello. Thank you very
Hi.
much indeed, Maria. I was just going to say to Ayushman and Shovita, thank you. Really, thank you. And Ayushman, to where you were highlighting the complexity of the situation that you're involved with, and the problems with neoliberalism. And as Wendy said, we work together in relation to the universities' partnerships, but we also research together, and we travel often between Sri Lanka, Colombo, and Kathmandu, and it's another trade route, isn't it? If you see what I mean. But what strikes me in working in these two countries, we're being very successful at offering these qualifications and influencing perhaps an employment sector, but it's superficial in many respects, because it's like scraping the surface of a culture and communities, and what else is going on. I often think of my colleagues wearing their nicely pressed shirts and cufflinks and so on, and yet just a few miles away, there'll be communities which have extremely different lifestyles, and they're rubbing up against each other. That's not to say here in London that we don't have the same happening around the East End. You know, we've got the City and the Gherkin right next door to East End London, but it is something that I think that we should disturb more, if I might say. But thank you. I really wanted to say thank you. Really, really interesting and engaging as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Hazel. Shovita, Ayushman, do you want to say something to Hazel?
I mean, thank you so much for your wonderful comments, and I think you are absolutely right. The problem with this is, I believe, if you stretch this particular critical line of argument, we might not be able to go to field and do anything about anything. And I, as a participatory researcher, participatory action researcher to be particular, I think that should not be an option. I mean, and I think there is a very small interstitial space that's there in which we actually try to expand our engagement as much as we can with the community and let the community decide what they want to do. And I know there is a problem with this as well. It could be spent in so many ways. But I think it's very important, and I mean, in geography, in human geography, there is basically a debate around honesty of this kind of work. And you are really right. We are basically, I mean, even if we are doing some sort of little bit support to community and all, we are just scratching the surface. Chances are very high we don't know, whether this community wants to do this kind of stuff or not. Sometimes what happens is we go through NGO, and unlike Shovita, and Shovita knows it, I mean, I have presented in front of her, I do not go through any NGO. Especially in Nepal, because I find it extremely scary because these are the discourse masters, and they basically, and we are talking about trafficking, which is a very, very politically charged, debate. So I don't know. It's a very, very complicated terrain that we are in, and I really don't know what is the solution. Perhaps there is no solution, but I don't know. Again.
So if I might just respond on that one, is that okay, Maria?
Yes,
As well as working internationally, I'm the leader of the professional doctorate in the business school. So I run the DBA program, and ours is positioned in terms of responsible management. So there is expected to be a purpose. And I've just been reading this afternoon on ethics and ethics in management research, and the broadness of it, and how taking into account the position of participants and communities, as well as especially in doctoral research, as well as the researcher and their desires. And if this research is really going to have a positive outcome, or is it potentially going to disrupt a system that works? It may not be the same system that works elsewhere. And what right have we got sometimes to disrupt systems? I mean, that's a whole big conversation, but really interesting, Ayushman. You've really given me some food for thought when I stand in front of my DBA candidates next week and try and disrupt their thinking, because they tend to think in straight lines at the moment. And we've got to be a little bit more controversial with them to get something meaningful in the end in about 5 years' time. But thank you again.
Thank you, Hazel. Andrea.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi.
Thank you very much for your presentations. They have been very thought-provoking. So yeah, definitely a lot of food for thought. I have a question for Shovita. I'm currently doing a research on how neo-abolitionist and pro-decriminalization representations connect to the debate on migration and migrants' rights in Italy and the UK. And I wanted to ask, what's your point of view on how decriminalization would, the decriminalization model would work in Nepal? What kind of options they would give more to people working in the entertainment sector? And as well, what's the legal status of prostitution in Nepal? Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea, right? Thanks for the really interesting question. This is something I don't think I have a clear answer to it, just to be honest, because like Ayushman has already mentioned, it's what they need, what they want, rather than us as researchers think what we want, right? As when we're reading, writing, we think, oh, we have our own worldviews, and this is something we have to make those unbiased opinions. But from what I learned from the research, from talking to the interviewees, talking to NGOs working in the entertainment sector, the recent interviews, they said that in fact decriminalization is a better option in Nepali context as well, because it's so widespread. Entertainment sector, it's spread in various like highway areas, in urban cities, semi-urban cities, and there are more than hundreds and hundreds of women working in these sectors in really precarious conditions, which means that maybe what they argued that maybe having a certain place, having maybe a staff card, having certain regulations would help them to work more openly, would sort of challenge the existing stigma around them. They would work more freely with less fear of police coming in, raiding, and even the family knowing. So I think this particular NGO, I say NGO because they are registered NGO, but they are not NGOs. Just to add to Ayushman's point, they are more like a collective. They are a female-based sex worker organization, which are very different to what anti-trafficking NGOs are. They're completely. I would never go to anti-trafficking route. I did that failure. Going back to Ayushman's point, the failure. I did that in my PhD, and I learned my lesson really well. So then moved on from there. Yeah. So going back to Andrea's point, yes. So decriminalization is something they are demanding. Sex workers' rights movement is still in a really in its stage of infancy. We are still talking about it. Discussions are there, but my interviews definitely said that it would give a safer space if sex work is decriminalized. In the Nepali context, it is a illegal activity to perform any sex work. So then the client will be arrested if we found, or the employer, and even the sex worker herself. So that's there, but there's no clear laws and in prostitution laws or sex work laws. So it's very, gray area. Often because of this, there's no clear laws and understanding of what sex work is. Means then women are prosecuted for various different reasons: public order or public defense. They're creating problems on the street, or morality policing. It's on you're spoiling my husband or my son, those sort of things, rather than the actual act itself. So that's there. So it is still illegal. Hence, there's lots of police raids and they get arrested and persecuted. But then, yes, what my interviewees wanted is decriminalization. As a researcher, I'm not there yet to say whether decriminalization is a better route, but that's something maybe it should come from the community, and I think that's what they feel at the moment. Especially these collectivists argue that maybe this is a better option, decriminalizing it, not legalizing, but decriminalizing. Does that answer your question, Andrea? I hope so.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Natasha, you've got your hand raised. Is it an all hand or it's still your... Oh, okay.
Sorry, it was a legacy hand.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Does anybody have any other question to Shovita and Ayushman? No? Well, then my turn. So again, thank you so much, you both, for doing such a provoking presentations. Shovita, I wanted to ask you, because I've been conducting research in the border in Mexico, in Mexico City quite recently, and interviewing migrant women on their way to the north, and very often they also, because they have no papers and documents, they move through illegal routes, and they they also want to preserve their identity, and they're hidden in this shelter where we went and interviewed them. Sometimes the perpetrators, they come very often running away from gender violence, and the perpetrators just follow them up towards they are, etc. So we talked a lot with them about the agency, and we reflected, the other researcher and myself, we reflected a lot about this notion of agency, whether they and how often they are portrayed and reached out as victims, while at the same time they are very independent and they've got very strong identities, and sometimes they look after the kids back home, they send money to their homes, etc. So I wonder, I'm sure you had the same kind of, because you mentioned that kind of multiple identities and these public shames. So at the same time, they are kind of ashamed for being in the business of the business of sex, but at the same time they are quite strong-minded and they've got the agencies and they know how to provide, and they very well how to provide for that they do provide for their kids, etc. So how do you look into those things? How do you look into the agency, and how do you navigate that kind of contradictions between agency and victimism and criminalization and re-victimization? How do you navigate those things?
Thanks, Maria. So as a researcher, as
a researcher, in your research, how do you manage to give a kind of body to these kind of contradictions?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I wish do I have an answer to that? But it's always, like I said, it's very like I said in the presentation, very intersecting realities. It's never a linear process, right? So they are sort of experiencing vulnerability, precarity, but at the same time they are experiencing empowerment, because they are providing for their family, they're taking care of children, they're sending them to schools. Our husband is nowhere on the scene, so they said that it's like they take everything as the day goes along, right? So one said, how do you cope? And she's like, it just depends on that day how I feel. I get up, if my clients are nice to me, I feel better, I feel empowered. But if there are days where I feel, if I'm abused, then I feel like what sort of life I am, and I blame my destiny or bhagya. So I think there are moments of vulnerability and victim, but at the same time there are moments of agencies as well. So it's like you said, I think there's a lot of there's not a clear line as to where they fall, and it all depends on their experience as they, take on this journey as entertainment workers. And it's very messy, it's very complex. And also when writing and presenting this research, I had so many, like, oh, how do I present? How do I present? What do I say that would not really be reductive in their experiences? And when we're coming with this framework, so it's extremely challenging. And also going back to this discomfort I felt when talking to them as a researcher, was also it came after every interview. When I said, thank you for the interview, thank you for giving time, I would just pause and say, why am I doing this? So it is always this constant battle with ourselves, right? But then I think the most important thing is for us to recognize that they have the agency as well, because although limited choices, whatever choices they have, but then we need to hear their voices. We need to give that space to them. And I think that's what I've learned from this research. I don't know if I've answered your question, but it's all.
You did, because we share this frustration and this sense of failure that Ayushman was talking about, and how we just scratched the surface. And that's why I also liked very much the presentation by Ayushman, because I've got exactly that feeling, Shovita, as you have, like, you've got such a rich data in the good terms, because you feel, oh, that's a very good and very interesting interview. At the same time, you feel guilty because you are kind of making some kind of narrative of profit of these miseries. So it links very well with Ayushman's presentation on the failure and how you scratch the surface, but also how you always constantly, you need to remind yourself that you need to be honest, and you need to be honest with yourself and with those people who gave you their stories for you to set up a narrative, write an article, do a presentation, write a book or whatever. But this honesty, I think, it's just I'm trying to and navigate that sense of failure. And I don't know if that happens to you both and also the people who are the other participants, researchers, but when you write the articles, you feel that you hardly cover nothing. You didn't have space to cover anything. You just want to tell a lot about these people, but you just have to reduce the quotes to a couple of sentences. So even if your articles get approved, you feel like, oh, I didn't tell you. I didn't even start when I was writing the conclusion. And now I have to take my other hat, because Luis and I were doing a project on Afghans and Syrians in London, and we're interviewing lots of Syrian families and couples and women and males, and exactly the same happens here. We also navigate that sense of failure all the time, that we won't be able to present those stories in the right or in the appropriate way, just not to give them a voice, but just to capture their voices, because they have a voice. So I don't know, Ayushman, whether you want to add something.
I mean, I really don't have much to add, to be honest. It is hard, to be honest. So, as I said, when I returned back to the community last year, the first question that they asked is, how did you represent our community? Because things are extremely complicated, and if you say one bad stuff, it would actually, had a proper material impact in communities' migration practices. I mean, from every household at the moment, everybody migrates irregularly and everything. And people told me that, you have to anonymize the entire village site, because it's not stigma that is attached to body. Here, stigma is attached to a place. And if you are not doing it, you are basically doing way more harm. And I think, with social research and geographical research, it's an ethical demand that is placed on us. Either we should not go to the field, and if we are going to the field, we have to spend time over there. I remember when I was going to the community initially, and they're like, people like you have come to this community so many times, and we don't give anything to them. And Shovita also said that, she has burnt her hand during the PhD. I mean, I knew that because I was one of those anti-trafficker before I started my PhD. And I was like, everything is orchestrated, and we have so many cases like that, and people do not trust. neither they trust anti-trafficking organization, nor they trust somebody like me, and who have to like constantly negotiate the positionality. And it's hard, and these are the moments you live every single time that you think about them, you present them, that you write about them. So I mean, and some of the stories are extremely traumatic as well. So I mean, and there are so many things that happen. So I mean, I personally, whenever I write, I do not like use a lot of quotes and everything. I try to make sense of them, and in a way that it's not harmful to the community, in a way that's not I mean and it's a hard work, to be honest. That's one particular, because sometimes we tend to give a lot, as you said, there are so many things to write about, and if we do that, chances are very high that anyone can pick one particular thing and do the things that you really don't want to do, really the community does not want to do. So and it's hard because we really don't know, like how our text would be interpreted by other people. So I don't know. I mean, I personally feel very, very like conflicted every time I do anything, every time I write about it, every time I speak about it. But I mean, I think it's important to confront it rather than be like being totally like super confident and super or on the other hand super very like scared about that. But in both sides, we don't have that like luxury to choose any side. So I don't know, to be honest. I think I mean, I know that I've said I don't know a lot of time, but believe it or not, that's the status of my understand things about the world. I really don't know, to be honest, right?
Yeah, I think it's part of this nature of research that the more we do research, the less we know. The more it's just like, yeah, exactly, that's the feeling, like I don't know, I can't talk by for all the people. Or yeah, no, that's really, really interesting, and these are very, very difficult topics to do research: sex work or women in the industry of this informal industry of sex and human trafficking. And yeah, it's a very controversial, very difficult thing to do. We should have done something on poetry or something like that, 18th century poetry. Anybody else have something to add to this very interesting discussion? I'm very conscious of time now. It's almost, well, it's 6:05. Does anybody else want to add something or write a comment, or just as a conclusion to this conversation? Do you want to add something, Shovita, Ayushman? Did you want to add something to that, to this presentation?
I don't know. I mean, I feel I'm really grateful that you gave this opportunity for me to talk about this. And I think most of the times we talk about how successful, how amazing, how super cool we are.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think we should create more spaces where we actually become very honest, very vulnerable, and say that we fucked up in the field. And it's important to acknowledge that particular thing, and despite of the shame, despite of the guilt, despite of all these effective responses that we encounter. And I think the more we do it, the better it would be both for us, for those people who look up to us, you know what I mean? So I think I'm really grateful that you gave this particular platform for me to talk about these kind of stuff. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, because I think you're absolutely right. It's all about impact. It's all about success, producing, publishing, and traveling, and getting grants, and all that kind of stuff. So, absolutely, you're right. Whenever you don't get a grant, which is in most of the occasion, most of the time, you get rejected articles and things like that. And grants, you feel that, oh, I'm getting behind, I'm not like the rest. And this is because, as you said, there should be more honestly, and among colleagues, just to talk freely. And even when you do field work, just to say it wasn't that productive, as productive as I was expecting. Yeah, so that's it. I think it adds value to the research, just to see all these sides, hidden sides. Shovita, do you want to say something?
I would just echo what Maria and Ayushman have said. We have to be constant reflection reflect your positionality. Even when I was introducing myself, saying, "Oh, by the way, I'm a university lecturer. I work in London, and I'm interviewing you." It didn't feel right. So many things. As a researcher, did I have to say that? Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Sometimes I feel so. Constant reflection. I think this is something we have to do as a researcher. But one of my colleagues said once, which has always struck me, that when you need to publish, I'm like, why? Because you've taken so much of the time doing all of this work, and if you don't publish, then nobody will know about that. So it's our moral obligation and ethical obligation to get it done. But we are so stuck with 3-star, 4-star journal ranking and everything. But sometimes our papers, like you said, gets rejected, and those voices never come forward. So I think there's a constant, this neoliberal university policies and this ranking and all of that, it sort of dilutes what we actually, special research like what we do,
exactly,
which matters to us the most. It's sort of, it narrows down, and this constant battle.
Yeah, definitely, because we're dealing with people in such a difficult situations, and sometimes we just, not us, but some people just lose track, and you can see that they don't have any kind of feelings. Avishi, you've raised your hand. Avishi, we can't hear you. Oh, she left. Oh no, but she's there. You can type your question or your observation in the chat if you want to, Avishi. Oh, okay. Okay, Hazel, thank you very much. We just wait for Natasha. Did you want to say something while we're waiting for Avishi to write?
Yeah, just a little thing. I just wanted to say, I did miss a bit of the, well, most actually, unfortunately, of the presentation about failure and all that. But just from what you've been saying, just afterwards in this conversation, it's making me feel better about my own research, the whole process of being honest and, and talking about it openly. I think it would be good for it, if that happened a lot more.
Agree, Natasha. Yeah, absolutely. This sense of sharing frustrations, it always helps. Okay, so I don't see any message typed by Avishi. So yeah, so we leave it here. Thank you so much again, Ayushman and Shovita, for your excellent presentations, thought-provoking, lots of food to, to think through. And yeah, this presentation is being recorded. I will just stop it now and will be uploaded to the website, to the